Then there was a beautiful North Vietnamese writer named Lee Min Quay. She was with us, and she was only 15 years old when she was a sapper on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Lee Min Quay said, "Yes, there was a Song Mai Trail. I helped build it. I remember the triple canopy forest and the craters. It was my work to fill in the craters." And then Rich Gilman answered him. Rich Gilman was 14 years old when he faked his age, and he joined the Air Force. And he passed all his tests with 100%. And so he was a flight engineer. Rich Gilman said, "I was a flight engineer. We bombed the Ho Chi Minh Trail every day, a couple of times a day." Rich kept looking at Lee Min Quay. His small eyes were wells of feeling. And next to him sat Charlie Motts, also steadily looking at her. Quay returned the gazes of the giants and held them. So, flying over the Ho Chi Minh Trail were Rich and Wayne, and on the ground was Quay. And now they meet and cannot get enough of one another. Keith said, "I was AWOL in Canada and met a Vietnamese who was also deserting the war. We stood in the snow and bowed to each other." Duke said, "Irony." I asked, "What's the Vietnamese word for irony?" Dimples winking, he said, "There isn't any. Vietnamese don't have a word for irony." Really? Did you say the Vietnamese language has no word for irony? Nah, not. There must be 5 or 8 words for irony. Everybody laughed. Duc, Quay, and Thai came up with one word after another, irony in Vietnamese, and laughed at each one. Irony, 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 irony. We were laughing at jokes in Vietnamese. I couldn't even think of one synonym for irony in English. So I'm going to skip now to after we've had our writing workshop, and now it's time to say goodbye. Wayne said that they had to catch the plane. Quay and Ty were setting off to see the USA, many big cities, and one small town in America's heartland, Gambier, Ohio. The circle broke up. People stood, continued talking. Rich Gilman hugged Lee Min Quay, fellow kid soldier of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He looked straight ahead, and the tears were falling from his open eyes. Charlie hugged Quay. His eyes were shut. She held him and rocked him like a baby. Her head came up to the chest of these big men. They clasped her against their heart. "Oh, precious being, alive, unharmed, you're all right. I almost killed you and did not. Thank God. You're here, alive. I did not kill you. You are dear to me, dearest. Oh, glad, glad." They had not seen the enemy. The VC had been invisible, hidden in the dark, in the jungle. She had been the enemy, this lovely, lovely woman. With these workshops, I learned to be able to write again, and it came from having my fellow writers around me and all of us working together. Another thing that I learned was that I didn't have to make up fictional scenes of reconciliation. I could make them happen in real life, and all I had to do was write them down. So I worked for 2 years on the book that burned, and then For a while I could not read and write, and then I gathered the workshop and then finished writing the 5th book of peace, and this process took 10 years. And maybe at about 9.5, maybe at the 9th year, I was feeling, oh, I don't know, desperate, and thinking, how can I ever end this? I mean, would this ever end? Am I going to, how can I get any rest? And so, at about 9 years of working on this book, I had some really interesting thoughts about writing, and so I'm going to read to you those thoughts. And you know what I was thinking too, that when I was writing Tripmaster Monkey, a fiction, that took me 10 years. And so I thought 10 years for that one, and now how many more years is it going to take to finish the 5th book of peace? And so then I thought, well, I think the answer must be poetry. Stop this slow prose. And so for fun, just for fun, I wrote this little book. It's called To Be the Poet. I have almost finished my long book. Let my life as poet begin. I want the life of the poet. I have labored for over 12 years. Oh my gosh, I thought it was only 10. So it took me 12 years. I have labored for over 12 years, 1,000 pages of prose. Now I want the easiness of poetry, the brevity of the poem. Poets are always happy. I want to be always happy. No plotting, any more plots. For the long book about the long wars in Vietnam and in the Middle East, I sacrificed time with my child, grown and gone, and my husband, and family, and friends who should have been loved more. The long book has got to be done soon, and I'll be free to live. I won't be a workhorse anymore. I'll be a skylark, free of obligations. I am 60 years old. I have enough reputation and fame and money. Poets don't care too much for money. I declare to you, I'm making a try for poetry. Say one becomes poet by grace. Beauty and truth hap upon the poet. All gift, no labor. The muse flies over and drops jewels upon the poet's head and into open hands. I will go about lifting an empty basket to the air. I want poetry to be the way it used to come when I was a child. The muse flew. I flew. Let me return to that child being and rest from prose. My mother used to hold me by the waist and boosted me out the upstairs front window. Sing to your grandfathers, she said. Tease them. My mother's hands at my waist squeezed poems out of me. Samgunga, Segunga, Nehoi Naya, Mahai Cup Cup, Segyo Yao Segyo, Nehoi Naya. Here's the translation of my very minor Chinese dialect. Hey, third grandfather. Hey, fourth grandfather. Where are you going? Horseshoes, clippity-clopping. 4 feet, then 4 feet. Where are you going? My 2 grandfathers sat atop the stagecoach, drawn by 2 black horses, and laughed and clapped their hands. Ah, they said, ah. Let me have poetry to be like that once again, and I shall die happy. So, it's actually listening to that voice. It could be me, or it could be a muse calling me to poetry that I began to write. I love a broad margin to my life. And I started writing this book as prose. And maybe I was about 100 pages into it when I said to myself, I am not going to work for another 10 years. And I will, and especially when I started this book, thinking I am going to be 65 years old pretty soon, and I cannot afford 10 years on another prose work. And so to hasten the pace of creativity, to hasten the pace of creation, I went into poetry. And I began this poem in a form, another form which I loved when I was a child, and that is the of the diary form, so that it could be very personal, so I can say whatever I want, and whatever happens on that day, that is what's given to me to write about. I am turning 65 years of age. In 2 weeks, I will be 65 years old. I can accumulate time and lose time. I sit here writing in the dark. Can't see to change these penciled words. Just like my mother, alone, bent over her writing. Just like my father, bent over his writing, alone, but for me watching. She got out of bed, wrapped herself in a blanket, and wrote down the strange sounds Father, who was dead, was intoning to her. He was reading aloud calligraphy that he'd written, carved with ink brush on his tombstone. She wasn't writing in answer. She wasn't writing a letter. Who was she writing to? Nobody. This well deep outpouring is not for anything. Yet we have to put into exact words what we are given to see, hear, know. Mother's eyesight blurred. She saw trash as flowers. Oh, how very beautiful. She was lucky, seeing beauty, living in beauty, whether or not it was there.